welcome to the History Things podcast, Instagram video exclusive, Maryland Campaign 1862 coverage. Matt, really excited to get back out in the field with you again. Thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure to be in the field, Pat.
Today, we are joining you from the Monocacy National Battlefield here in Frederick, Maryland, just south of the original Fredericktown during the American Civil War. Separate village. This is Monocacy Junction during the wartime. Now, Monocacy is known, and the battlefield here is geared towards its 1864 Battle of Monocacy Junction experience. Jubal Early had come through the valley and was threatening a very lightly defended Washington City, and a weird, interesting ragtag Union forces soldiers here, you know, some hardcore veterans and some very fresh 100 Days men, played a pretty good speed bump as far as Jubal Early's efforts, and they
delays him for a whole day.
That day saves, Washington City from having a sizable Confederate force coming into it basically undefended.
But we're here for 1862.
Right, because not a lot of people are aware that this battlefield has 1862 roots kind of in multiple places. So today we're on the Best Farm. It was during the battle here in 1864. It was occupied by John Best, who was a tenant farmer. Matt, was he here in 1862 as well?
His father's here.
So the Best family's been on this battlefield for most of the war. So in 1862, we have a very interesting scene playing out when August turns to September, right? Actually, a little bit before that, the summer had a very strong Union offensive taking place down on the Virginia Peninsula. They had landed and were moving in towards Richmond. The Confederate Army was basically playing a big game of defense at this point. Things are going to change, though. Joe Johnston's going to be pretty severely wounded.
Correct.
There'll be
at 7 Pines.
Not 7 days, because everybody gets those confused. There'll be a change of command in Confederate leadership after a single day where I believe General Smith is going to take over for a day. Robert E. Lee will be given command of the Army kind of on the spot. Things are kind of going crazy. There's all this logistical insanity around them, and Jeff Davis basically says the Army's yours. From here, the name of the game is going to shift essentially for the Confederate forces. Where I said they were playing defense, now they're going to play on offense, and they're going to unleash a series of aggressive attacks against the Army of the Potomac, which wasn't really expecting these kind of military engagements from an army that they had understood to be playing defense.
And what are those attacks called?
7 days.
The 7 days.
7 days, right? Not 7 Pines. So anyway, so what ends up taking place is, so the Confederate Army has just shifted from playing a really strong defensive game to a pretty unexpected, really strong offensive game. Right. And this is going to kind of put the Army of the Potomac on their heels. They're not really expecting it. And after a while, the attacks are so aggressive that the Union Army of the Potomac is actually going to retreat or move themselves to Harrison's Landing, fall back, if you will. McClellan, I believe, who's in command of the Army, is going to call it a change of base.
Change of base, yep.
Call it what you want, folks. But anyway, so what this allows Robert E. Lee to do is kind of turn his attention to another Union Army that had been lurking in Virginia. John Pope's Army of Virginia, Union Army of Virginia.
Just to make it confusing.
Just to make it super confusing, has been kind of working the other half of this pincer movement that the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Virginia are supposed to be doing, kind of squeezing in around Richmond. Now, at this point, Lee doesn't have to worry so much about the Army of the Potomac, so he unleashes the full might of what he's got left at this point of the Army of Northern Virginia on the Army of Virginia, right around the battlefields of Manassas, remember, from 1861. Second battle takes place in August of 1862, and it goes about exactly the same for the Union Army as the first one in 1861. John Pope's army is smashed. They are not routed, but they are demoralized pretty badly, and they are going to slink back into the defenses of Washington City. And it's at this point where things get kind of interesting, you could say, for the war as a whole, for the nation as a whole. Because even though Robert E. Lee has gone on some offensive attacks, the mindset right now is still as a whole defense, right? Kind of just making sure Virginia and the rest of the Confederate states are just kind of protected and held, right? Robert E. Lee is going to write a letter on September 3rd to Jefferson Davis, who's Confederate president. He's going to ask for permission to move his army out of Virginia soil and into Maryland. They're believing it's a Union-occupied state, and there's some other stuff Matt's going to cover here in a minute. Right. But he's not going to wait for permission to be granted. As soon as he writes this letter and sends it off, it's like, hey, see ya, send that to Jeff Davis. He's going to start moving his forces kind of right away. Now, they're around the Centerville, Virginia area, so it's going to take them mostly a day to come up. And while this is happening, the Union Army of the Potomac has more or less made its way off the Virginia Peninsula at this point. The Army of Virginia, Union Army, has made its way into the defenses of Washington. And it's at this time where, after some political chess and gamesmanship, what do we do with McClellan? What do we do with Pope? Like all this stuff, they come to the I guess, consensus that we're going to give the command of the Army of the Potomac, as it is, to McClellan. We're going to combine the Army of Virginia with that, as well as the Washington garrison.
Right.
So this newly reconstituted Army of the Potomac is just massive amounts of men, logistics, armament, things like that.
But it's very, very confused.
Yes, and they also now know that Robert E. Lee's army has crossed into Maryland. So now, while they're confused and huge and trying to work out their, inner big new growing pains, they got to go track down this invading force. So
That's right.
On September 4th, the day after all of this is kind of taking place, Robert E. Lee's men finally make it to the banks of the Potomac, and they set across the river. And they come across the river into Maryland with the regimental bands striking up and playing Maryland, My Maryland. Matt, what the hell is going on right now? We have just shifted everything that this war was supposed to be. The Confederate Army is here in Maryland now. Why did they come to Maryland?
Right. Well, Pat, the reasons for coming to Maryland are several. As you implied, there is this thought within the Confederacy that Maryland is being forcibly withheld in the Union, and that all the Confederate forces would need to do is move across the Potomac into Maryland, wave their banners, and the state would flock to their aid. Now, that's not entirely true. There's large sections of Maryland that do have strong Southern sympathies. Southern Maryland, elements of Eastern Maryland, of course, do. But out here in Central and Western Maryland, Lee is going to receive a rather cool reception. And he's going to begin writing about this almost immediately, how he's not really receiving lots and lots of accolades, lots of praise, and very few recruits.
Is it fair to say this was kind of deflating because they were expecting to kind of come across as liberators in a sense?
I think initially, to be fair, when they reach Poolesville, they do get a lot of cheering and things like that. But as they move deeper into Maryland, away from the Potomac River, there is a real sense of these people are being polite, they're selling us things, but they're not our friends.
Right.
And a lot of Confederate soldiers and officers, not just the upper echelons of the Army, but the line officers are writing about this in their letters, in their diaries. These people are being very standoffish to the Confederate effort. Now, with the movement into Maryland, we also have a logistical question going on with the Army of Northern Virginia. Lee wants to live off the enemy for a while. Maryland has been relatively untouched by the war. We've had some raids, we've had some minor cavalry clashes and things of that nature, but for the most part, we haven't had any major engagements in Maryland and not a large amount of property destruction. So Lee is hoping to live off the fields and farms of Maryland and maybe even push into Pennsylvania, thereby giving Northern Virginia a break and giving them time to bring in their own crops for the winter to feed his army later on.
A lot of historians speculate that Harrisburg was one of the potential targets for this incursion into the North.
Right. And piggybacking off that, Pat, it's now believed that less of capturing towns and more of destroying Union armies was really Lee's intention here, because all of this, including intervention, the potential for Europe, specifically England and France, to get involved in the war on the Confederacy's side. To do this, to affect the midterm elections, to affect a potential intervention by Europe, Lee needs to win and keep winning. And this time he's looking to win on Union soil, beating the Federals on their own land.
So it's safe to say that there's a strong amount of military and political chess kind of all happening at the same time here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when Confederate forces cross over the Potomac on September 4th, they are going to move up into central Maryland, heading for first Monocacy Junction. In fact, the Monocacy River will, or specifically the railroad bridge, is one of their targets. They will succeed in destroying that railroad bridge, and Lee's forces are going to camp here on the property of the Best Farm. Now, this is important because he's not actually here where we're at, right around the buildings. He's in the corner of this field down.
Right over the crest of that ridge.
There was a woodlot there in throughout the Civil War, not only 62 and 64, but the whole war. There's a woodlot there, and it would be within that woodlot that Lee is going to have his headquarters camp. On the 6th, 7th, and 8th of September, the Army of Northern Virginia is around Monocacy Junction, around the Best Farm, It's relaxing a little bit. The men have been issued soap. They are bathing and washing their clothes in the Monocacy River. Like I said, they will destroy the railroad bridge over the Monocacy River, the B&O Railroad Bridge. And then we're going to begin having some movement occur on the part of the federal forces.
So a couple things have taken place while Lee is coming up, right? So one of the things is the Federal Army, the Army of the Potomac, has left Washington.
Correct. On
more or less the same day that the last major bulk troops of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia are arriving in Frederick. So we're talking like September 7th, September 8th, right?
Yep.
On the 8th, like we just covered, there was a cavalry clash at the Landon House in Urbana, right? The vanguard of the Union columns have made their way to Hyattstown. Sorry, the clash happens in Hyattstown.
Exactly.
Not Hyattsville. If you look at a map, they're like this. They're not even close. Hyattstown is up modern day 270. Hyattsville's like outside College Park. So there's the vanguard of the Union column runs into some Confederate pickets at Hyattstown. There's a big cavalry party happening at the Landon House in Urbana. Jeb Stuart's having a good old time, and they hear this fighting and they ride off. It's all kind of wrapped up and dealt with. They make their way back. The party continues, but there's a new tone on the party. They know that there is counter movement. So while this is going on, and actually even before that, as Lee was coming into Maryland, he was aware of the Federal Army of the Federal Army of the Potomac's presence in Washington City, Washington, D.C., but he was also aware of another sizable Union Army presence in Harper's Ferry.
That's correct.
And he's going to kind of gamble that his movement across the river is going to kind of wig them out.
Yep.
He's going to hope that they either abandon it altogether or they consolidate back to somewhere like Martinsburg or elsewhere.
Right.
Doesn't go as planned. So on the 9th, while he knows he's being pursued by the massive Federal Army of the Potomac, he's got to make a decision about what to do next, knowing that he's got this big army coming up from Washington City and this pretty sizable force, about 10 to 12,000 guys?
Around 13.
Around 13,000 guys out at Harper's Ferry. So what's Lee going to do, knowing sort of where the chess pieces are on the board right now, around September 8th or 9th?
Right. On September 9th, Lee is going to make a decision, just like you said, Pat. He's got the Harper's Ferry garrison who has not wigged out. They are remaining in Harper's Ferry to guard that confluence of the Shenandoah and the Potomac rivers. There's federal resources there. It's a supply depot. Lee had hoped they would withdraw. They didn't. On September 9th, he is going to write Special Orders 191. Now, 191 is important to this campaign because it's going to dictate, at least in the beginning, the movements of the Confederate Army. Over the years, Pat, you and I have both read a lot about this campaign. We've done a lot of research. And what is 191 oftentimes referred to as?
Two things. The Lost Orders, which we'll get into in a moment.
Yep.
And the battle plan, the
Right.
Confederate battle plan.
And that's not accurate. It's actually a marching order. There's no, other than for engaging the Harper's Ferry defenders, if they remain, there's nothing in there about an actual engagement. There's nothing talking about the fighting at South Mountain, which will happen on the 14th of September. And it definitely doesn't talk about fighting at Antietam. Special Orders 191 is a marching order, and that's important to remember.
We'll give you a pass, but now you know.
Now, 191 is going to divide Lee's army
Right.
into several distinct parts. Jackson is going to be sent to Harper's Ferry by way of Martinsburg to deal with the Harper's Ferry garrison.
Right.
He will also have Lafayette McLaws and his troops moving with him, and John Walker's men will also be sent down to Harper's Ferry, but they're going to have a much more circuitous route.
Right.
They're actually going to go back to the Potomac River, cross, and move towards Harper's Ferry to take the Loudon Heights on the Virginia side.
So it's when Walker's guys are actually crossing the river into Virginia to occupy Loudon Heights that another cool little piece of local history for those of you like me who grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and have made your home in Frederick County, Maryland for like the last 20 years. Another actually pretty interesting little tidbit of this campaign takes place. Some of Walker's guys are going to peel off and head down to a place called the Monocacy Aqueduct. Now, when the Army of Northern Virginia was crossing into Maryland, D.H. Hill and some of his guys had been down at this pretty major aqueduct along the C&O Canal and other places, and they'd been kind of tearing things up, burning stuff here and there, causing a whole bunch of ruckus.
Digging holes,
things like that, and, you know, basically just trying to damage the Union infrastructure in the area. And so when they get to this aqueduct, you know, which is this huge granite, you know, arch system, they're going to try to destroy it so that the Union Army can't benefit from it in any way. Doesn't really work out for them, so they kind of abandon it and leave. Now, on September 9th, this order is going to fall to John G. Walker, right? So as his guys are heading over into Virginia, some of them are going to peel off, and they're going to head down to the Monocacy Aqueduct. And they're going to really, really, really do their best to try to drill into the mortar, I'm sorry, not the mortar, just directly into the granite face of the aqueduct and blow it up. Unfortunately for these guys, this thing was quarried, the aqueduct was quarried from stone out of the base of nearby Sugarloaf Mountain. Yep. Now, interestingly, sidebar to the sidebar, Sugarloaf Mountain was a Union and Confederate signal post at varying times during the war. It's probably one of the only major mountains in that area, and the vantage point is spectacular. Mm-hmm. When we were over in Leesburg, Virginia, at the Confederate fortification Fort Evans, when you get up on the parapet there and see on the ridge lines out into Maryland, there's a lone mountain, Sugarloaf. And you can see forever in both directions, so you can see why they would use it as a signal post. But the aqueduct is built out of stone that's been blasted or quarried out of the base of this mountain, and granite is exceptionally hard. And these guys weren't intending on blowing up an aqueduct, so the tools they have aren't really up for the job. Right. So after feverishly drilling into the side of this thing for hours and hours and hours, and a couple failed detonation attempts, they got to abandon it as well. So the aqueduct itself, might have seemed kind of like it's not really a big deal. In fact, Walker's guys have to charge off some Union defenders, if I'm not mistaken. There's a small Union picket force down there who kind of get brushed off. Yep. And I guess the way they termed it, I think the George Tyler Moore Center termed it, I think today they said it was basically undefended but not vulnerable because it was granite. And so when they had to abandon it, it just kind of stood there defiantly, and Walker's guys proceeded to Harper's Ferry, which we'll get into in a few days when we cover the battles of South Mountain and Harper's Ferry, siege of Harper's Ferry. Yep. But we leave you, or we don't leave you, but we get back to, the armies have split, the Confederate Army has split, and they are now heading towards Harper's Ferry. Walker has crossed over into Virginia. And where are the rest of Lee's guys going?
The rest of Lee's force is under James Longstreet. He commands the other wing, the right wing of the Confederate Army, and he is going to continue moving west. Now, Lee is going to be moving with him. He is going to cross over the Catoctin Heights and then move into the Middletown Valley and finally over South Mountain. Lee and Longstreet are planning on consolidating at Boonesboro, Boonesboro, Maryland. However, Lee is going to throw kind of another curveball, if you will, into this plan, and he is going to send elements of Longstreet's command all the way up to Hagerstown. There's rumors of supplies, federal supplies, in Hagerstown. Lee wants to try to get those if possible.
I think there's rumors of militia, right?
Absolutely. There's also rumors of Pennsylvania troops coming down from Pennsylvania towards Hagerstown, and Lee wants to make sure that avenue of approach is blocked in case there's any issue. Now, Special Orders 191 was written on the 9th. We know that Walker's already moving at least a little bit, but the vast majority of Confederate forces are actually going to move on September 10th.
Right.
The order is issued to the various commanders, the various division commanders, and they would begin moving. It is going to take several days for the Confederate Army to move out of the area. In fact, the last Confederate troops are not leaving Frederick until September 12th. And they're leaving Frederick just as the lead elements of the Union 9th Corps are coming into town. We're even going to have a brief clash in the streets.
Yeah, the Battle of West Patrick Street.
Yes, I think it's one cannon shot and some pistols.
Yes.
Regardless.
There is fire exchanged amongst the citizenry of Frederick in 1862. Yeah, cool story.
Now, it would be during this issuing of the various copies, though, that we have a problem.
That's right.
The Army of Northern Virginia in 1862 is not the army that we're going to see in 63 or even late 62 with very distinct corps. What we have are two wings, Jackson's wing of the army and James Longstreet's wing of the army. And their divisions are often interchanged. We see some of Longstreet's men fighting under Jackson at 2nd Bull Run or 2nd Manassas.
Even here at Harper's Ferry.
And definitely at Harper's Ferry. A lot of Longstreet's troops are fighting under Jackson at Harper's Ferry. This is a common occurrence at the time, but it does lead to command issues. Specifically, what's going to happen is that due to this confusing situation, an extra copy of Special Orders 191 was written by a gentleman by the name of Chilton. He is one of the aide-de-camp to Lee's headquarters. That copy is believed to have been meant for Daniel Harvey Hill. Now, General Hill is one of these divisions that has been kind of moved back and forth between the wings of the Army, depending on where they were and what they were doing. Excuse me. Hill receives his copy. He receives the first copy, which would have been written in ink, as the other division commanders did, and it would be this penciled copy that is lost. Now, this penciled copy would be lost somewhere from the corner of this field down here where the best grove was, and probably another mile north. One of the great misconceptions of the losing of Special Orders 191 was that it was written right here at the Best Farm buildings and lost somewhere in this immediate area.
Nope.
Did not happen that way.
Back where CSX owns the land. Don't go looking for that area. It's illegal. It's trespassing.
And it's probably up near Grove Road, where the Frederick Quarry now exists.
Oh, yeah.
And so the ground is completely blitzed. So there's really nothing left, unfortunately.
A lot of rocks.
A lot of rocks of where this camp and where this document was likely lost. Now, Confederate forces move out of the area. On the 13th, as more and more federal troops are approaching the area, we're going to have something that's very common to Americans in modern society, a traffic jam.
Yes.
The Union 12th Corps, the Union 9th Corps, the 2nd Corps, everybody is being funneled towards Frederick, Maryland. And it's going to take time to move these thousands upon thousands of men through the streets. As such, some units are told to wait, and the Union 12th Corps was told to do just that.
That's right.
With the 12th Corps is the 27th Indiana Infantry, and it would be 2 gentlemen from the 27th that will actually be deployed as skirmishers near their camp. They're going to be told they can rest, and when they go to rest, they're going to find an envelope in one of these former Confederate camps.
That's right.
Now, oftentimes we talk about the orders being wrapped around cigars. In fact, we now believe that there was probably 2 cigars inside an order's envelope.
Right.
The idea being that one receiving the orders would take the orders, do with them what they would, but then they would sign the envelope and send that back to wherever the orders came from.
Keep your receipts, boys and girls.
Always keep your receipts. Now, this didn't happen. The orders envelope and the orders are intact. There's no signature on the back. This document was in all likelihood dropped on its way to Daniel Harvey Hill's camp. And Hill himself, though he would take the blame for losing the documents for years after the war, he will deny it vigorously. And in fact, he will even be able to produce his own copy of Special Orders 191, the inked version, that can be found in the Chapel Hill archives down in North Carolina.
Correct.
Now, when these 2 gentlemen, Sergeant Bloss
and Barton W. Mitchell, Corporal Barton W. Mitchell,
find the document, it would actually be Mitchell that finds the document first. We know this, even though there was a lot of debate after the war, because Bloss actually writes a letter 13 days after the Battle of Antietam. Both he and Mitchell were wounded in the intense fighting in the cornfield, and he comments that Corporal Mitchell was very lucky and found a document important to Lee's army. Now, this really helps solidify for us as modern researchers when this document came into federal hands, but there's always been that debate of when did McClellan get it? And for many, many years, it's been claimed that he had it at noon and then sat on it for hours before moving his army. We now know that is not true.
Correct.
Because the 27th Indiana Infantry is not even around Frederick until well after noon. It's now believed, so go ahead.
Sorry, McClellan hitters.
It's now believed that McClellan probably received the document around 2, maybe even 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the Union Army of the Potomac is already moving with alacrity at this point. They have a rough idea where Lee is, where he's going, and they are trying to get at him between the pieces of his army. This document only seems to confirm this. And one could argue it might even hurt McClellan more than help him.
Gives him a lot of confidence, right? McClellan's got this quote, right? Can I do it?
Go ahead.
I know the quote.
Go for it.
He's got a quote. Once he's got this Confederate battle plan, it's marching orders. Once he's got this sort of Confederate directive in his hands, he says, "I have a paper here with which, if I can outwit Bobby Lee, I'll be willing to go home. So he's got a lot of confidence that he just found essentially the golden ticket as to like where everybody on the chessboard is, and now he can make his moves accordingly. However, it is 3-day-old information, so he does have to wait for a certain amount of confirmation, which he will get in the coming hours.
Exactly. He is going to send his cavalry commander, General Pleasonton, towards Harper's Ferry, because 191 mentions Harper's Ferry a lot. They will be moving towards Harper's Ferry. Cavalry will be moving that direction. They're going to hear the firing, the cannonading going on, because the fighting around Harper's Ferry has begun, at which point they will return to McClellan here around Frederick, probably around 6 p.m., confirming that, yes, indeed, there appears to be a credible threat to Harper's Ferry. Now, the reason I said that this document might actually hurt the Army of the Potomac a little bit is because McClellan, as you guys are probably aware, is operating under the false pretense that the Army of Northern Virginia, the Confederate Army, outnumbers him. He's been getting a lot of bad intel from supposedly good sources. His cavalry commander, his intelligence commander for the Pinkertons.
That's one of the best future detectives and investigators in American history.
Even the governor of Pennsylvania has his own personal spy networks down here in Maryland at the time, trying to figure out what's going on, because Governor Curtin believes his state's about to be invaded.
That's right.
So there's a lot of bad intel moving into the Army of the Potomac's headquarters. McClellan is trying to sift through all this information. He is pretty certain, because of all this intel, that Lee outnumbers him. The movements of the Army of Northern Virginia, the fact that they are breaking themselves up into big chunks in enemy territory, seems to confirm this. Now,
what idiot would put themselves over a barrel like that is his kind of mentality.
Right.
So he's got to just figure that Lee's no dummy, and he's of course got these numbers.
Right. So McClellan is now going to continue to move aggressively. I know that's hard to hear sometimes.
Again, sorry, McClellan haters.
But he is going to continue to move aggressively. In fact, we could almost argue that having 191 gives him a little bit more gas, because by the evening of the 13th, he is ordering the 6th Corps to move at dawn the next day. He has ordered the Union 9th Corps over the Catoctin Mountains, after those passes had been captured by Federal cavalry, into the Middletown Valley, with the Union 1st Corps right behind it. This is Ambrose Burnside's wing of the Army. Now, these Federal troops are going to be in Middletown by midnight on September 13th. So this idea that McClellan is just sitting on his hands for 12 or more hours is just not accurate. And we're going to see the results of this when we talk in just a few days about the fighting at South Mountain.
So the famous Lost Orders, right? 191. This is one of the best what-if kind of things. It's one of the best legends, myths of the Civil War. It's not a myth in the sense that, like, it didn't exist. It totally existed. It was a very real thing, and it had very real effects and ramifications on the coming days, coming hours, weeks and days, or days and weeks. Got to do them in order, right? But it wasn't this, like, magical battle plan that told McClellan exactly where everybody was at every minute. And there was some critical thinking that they had to do from the Federal perspective. And they do a really good job of doing it, because they do catch up, like Matt was saying, to, you know, Lee's chunk of the army around South Mountain and the passes there. We're talking, where do we leave this right now? On the 13th? So roughly 24 hours from where we're leaving this right now. You know, the Maryland campaign is a 3-week or so kind of endeavor here onto Maryland soil, and it gets going kind of slowly between the 3rd, 4th, and like the 9th. Right. But once they start to move out of Frederick, things start to go really fast, because both armies are within, you know, relative proximity of each other, almost consistently from this day all the way through the end of this campaign, and even, you know, for the next, you know, few weeks into October, they're still kind of hovering close enough. So we thank you guys for, you know, hanging out with us. We love doing these from the field exclusives. Again, today is a as it's happening kind of thing. So try to imagine, as Matt and I are talking to you right now, we are surrounded by Confederate bivouacs. We're tripping over campfires and we're stealing all their hardtack. We're not really doing that. They're hungry guys. That would be lame. But anyway, we thank you guys for joining us out here in the field for our History Things podcast, Instagram video exclusive, Maryland Campaign 1862. We'll see you guys a little later with the battles of South Mountain and the siege of Harper's Ferry. See you guys.
Good night.